So you know I'm not real philosophical or deep, I think we've established that, but I once heard somebody say that sex is the easel upon which a relationship paints a picture of itself. See how philosophical that is? Here's what that means practically. If a relationship is self-centered, the sex will reflect that as well. If a relationship is loving, the sex will be loving as well. If a relationship is connected, then the sex will further the connection. If a relationship is disconnected, then the sex often becomes a routine, simply physical act in the relationship. Basically what it's saying is whatever the relationship is, the sex just reflects that relationship. Now, we've established that sex is both important and powerful in the context of marriage, but yet many couples struggle with their sexual relationship and fight about sex or lack of sex in a relationship. So in this video, my hope is to help out. I want to identify 5 things that often hinder sex in a marriage. That's today on Relationships. Hey, welcome to Relationships. My name's Eric Wooten. If this is your first time hanging out with us, welcome to the place to get practical relationship advice that actually works in your relationship. If you've not already done so, go ahead and click the subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss any upcoming videos. And if you want a free guide to intimacy, you'll see a link in the description area below. Go ahead and click on that. If you're looking for a place to strengthen your relationship with other couples, check out our Altered Marriage membership. If you're looking for a live class format, we're kicking off our 6-week Zoom masterclass in January, in the middle of January. You can get more information about that below as well and sign up before it fills up. So let's talk about sex. Sex is one of the parts of relationship that seems like it gets negatively impacted by anything and everything that you can imagine ever in a relationship, right? What gets in the way of sex? Well, our connection does, our conflict does, our presence, our busyness, our children, body image issues, hygiene, you name it. It gets in the way of the sexual relationship, but it's important in a marriage for a sexual relationship to be healthy. And so couples continue to fight for or fight about and struggle in this area. And so in this video, what I want to do is I want to give you 5 things that I think often can hinder the sexual relationship. The reason I want to talk about them is because sometimes when you have some language or when you kind of have been given an assignment by somebody outside of the two of you, it's a little easier to talk about it. So my hope is as we bring up these areas, if any of them resonate, this will be a starting point for discussion with you and your spouse about, hey, yeah, I think that is one of the reasons that hinders me. Let's talk a little bit about it. So 5 things that can hinder the sexual relationship in marriage. Number 1 is guilt. A lot of people have guilt when it comes to sex based on things they've done in the past sexually, about relationships maybe they've had in the past, about the ways they've used sex in the past, and so there's guilt tied to it. Even one step further, for people who claim to be Christians, a lot of them know that God's design is that sex was for the institution of marriage, and so whether you hope to go into marriage as a virgin and now you didn't and you feel guilty about that, or whether you were sexually active with this person that you finally married and you felt guilty when we were doing it before marriage, but now I'm in the marriage and it's supposed to be okay, but I still have guilt attached to it because it wasn't always okay and I don't know how to separate those things. But for a lot of people, when there's guilt attached to sex, it is hard for them, even in the confines of marriage, where it's supposed to be great and pro-God and everything else. They struggle to separate the guilt from the sex, and it is still always lingering there. And so oftentimes guilt will hinder sex. What I'd recommend you do is, if that's how you feel, talk about it with your spouse. Say, man, I really feel guilt around this, and maybe you guys can work through some of that, release some of that, ask for forgiveness for some of those areas, so that you begin walking guilt-free, and that's no longer something that is hindering you in your relationship. Number 2 thing that I think can hinder sex in marriage is inadequacy. Now, I think porn and romance novels can be to blame for a lot of this stuff, but a lot of times we have these images or expectations of what we think the sexual relationship in marriage is supposed to be, and it's based on a false reality, porn, movies, romance novels. And so you come into marriage with some high expectation and you go, I don't think I can measure up to that. And I feel inadequate about that. And so I'd rather just not even engage at all. And so I don't know how many times I have to continue to have the same discussion. Listen, those are movies, which means the people in them, whether it's a romance movie or porn, they are actors. And because they're actors, it's a performance, which means it's not real. So quit comparing the reality of your marriage to something that's not real. You will never measure up. That'll never be a win. And no matter how often we have that conversation, I don't know how many times I'm going to continue to talk to husbands and wives who are still struggling in this area. We've got wives, and you can hear the frustration in their voices when they feel like their husband's expectation is they would be this high energy, seductive, role-playing, gymnast level, flexible porn star that's going to meet their husband's every craving. And they can't measure up to that. And so they're like, this is ridiculous. And it is ridiculous because a lot of these men have these images because they spend too much time looking at porn. And if that's you men, it is not your wife's job to satisfy the sexual immorality you've been feeding yourself since you were 14, now that they're married to you. So you need to adjust your expectations. But it's not just the wives. Husbands feel the same thing. Husbands often feel inadequate, like maybe they can't please their wives sexually, or maybe they don't measure up to the movies and the romance novels, and they can't be everything, a great worker and a great husband and a great father and difficult and hard and pressing through, but also soft at other times and emotional, and they just feel like they can't. And you know what? If you feel like you're going to be inadequate, nobody wants to fail. And so oftentimes, rather than failing and being inadequate, you will choose not to engage in a sexual relationship at all. So inadequacy, feelings of inadequacy, will hinder the sexual relationship. Number 3 is fear, which kind of goes along with the feelings of inadequacy oftentimes. If I feel like I'm going to be, or I fear being inadequate, I'm not going to engage in the sexual relationship. But there also may be a fear of failure, like you won't perform quite right or won't be able to perform. There's fears of vulnerability. Having sex with somebody is a vulnerable thing to do. There can be fears around rejection. I did a whole video on sexual rejection and how that can hurt a marriage. There may be fears around sharing your likes and dislikes with your spouse, like maybe they'll make fun of you, or maybe they'll think you're a freak, or whatever it might be. But fears around the sexual relationship, you do not want to fail. You do not want to be rejected. You do not want to be vulnerable and then have that person not be interested in you. So oftentimes fear will cause us to go, you know what? I'd rather not initiate and avoid this fear of rejection or failure or whatever else, vulnerability, whatever else it might be. And you know what? That feels better than actually engaging and pushing through that and having a healthy sexual relationship. So oftentimes fear is the thing that is hindering you in your sexual relationship. Fourth thing that hinders a sexual relationship is shame. And now shame's a little bit like guilt, but has a completely different foundation of roots. So guilt says that I feel bad for something I've done. Shame says I feel bad for who I am. It's an identity issue, not just a behavioral issue. And so a lot of people have so much shame around the sexuality and sexual relationships and sexual past and things that have happened that it becomes almost impossible for them to engage in this area of the relationship without completely disassociating, right? Just, I guess, got to take myself somewhere else. I'm not even here and present in this moment. That's the only way I know how to push through. So some people have shame around maybe some childhood sexual abuse. They think something's wrong with me, or I invited this. There must be something going on inside of me that this person would do this to me. Maybe sexual assault or rape. People struggle with that I'm now damaged goods, that nobody would really want me if they knew anything around me. Maybe it's past sexual behaviors, some deviance around that, certain likes or things like that. But oftentimes we can become so shameful about who we are based on past sexual experiences that trying to step into a healthy sexual relationship is foreign to us, and we just don't even know what to do. If you're a person of faith, you want this is in the very first book of the Bible. Adam and Eve sinned, and they immediately covered their genitals, because there was shame around this area of vulnerability, because they had been uncovered in this area. And so shame prevented them from being open, from being out in the open, from being vulnerable with them. The Bible says that originally they were naked and unashamed. So if you are dealing with some shame issues around anything past sexually, either in your marriage or prior to your marriage, you're going to have a real hard time having a healthy perspective of good, healthy sexuality within your marriage. And it's probably something you need to talk about, something you need to deal with, because it's usually attached and surrounded by lies. It's not true. That's not who you are. That may have been something that happened to you or something that you've done or engaged in, but it does not define you. Your identity is not found in that thing. And so we often have to remove shame from the equation if we want to have a healthy sexual relationship. And the fifth thing that can hinder sex in a marriage is disconnection. As I said in the beginning, that sex is the easel upon which the relationship paints a picture of themselves. So oftentimes when you're disconnected in a relationship, it's hard to want to engage sexually. And now this often gets billed as more of a female issue than a male issue, because guys can compartmentalize, and even though we ain't talked in 3 days, they can roll in the evening, be like, hey, sex, you good? Me, good? No. Listen, while women are more emotionally intertwined and connected as a whole, men also struggle in this area too. If they don't feel respected, they don't feel connected to their spouse, they don't feel like they have any kind of friendship or relationship with their spouse, it often becomes hard to want to engage in the sexual relationship. So if you're disconnected, you need to talk about why I feel disconnected. You need to start intentionally planning times to connect, building a friendship, spending some time together, developing emotional intimacy or recreational intimacy, intellectual intimacy. And as you grow the connectedness in the relationship, the sexual relationship should follow as well. So there's 5 things that I have seen, both experienced in my own life and seen working with lots of couples, that can often hinder the sexual relationship. So if you check the box on one of those or all 5 of those, at least you've got a roadmap of some topics and some language that you can begin discussing this with your spouse, and hopefully make some headway in these areas and begin to eliminate the things that are hindering you, so that you can get back to having a frequent and healthy sexual relationship in marriage. Love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. You probably got a few other things you want to add to this list of 5, but we didn't want a 55-minute video, so at some point we got to limit how many of them we're going to tackle. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are the other things that maybe hinder sex in your marriage. If you're looking for a place, again, to connect with other couples, check out our Altered Marriage membership or sign up for our January masterclass. We have a phenomenal time for 6 weeks, strengthening and working on our marriages. You can get all the information in the description area below. And until next time, I'll see you right back here on Relation Shots.